Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The Helios star system, once a jewel in the galaxy, now stood as a testament to decay. Its cities, once filled with laughter and life, were crumbling under the weight of corruption and economic collapse. The system's central government had long since lost its power, and its people were left with a choice: cling to what little hope remained or let the system die. Desperation hung in the air like a thick smog, choking the last embers of faith that things would ever improve. Governor Cyrus, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a chiseled jaw and piercing eyes, strode confidently onto the stage. He had been the voice of hope, the shining beacon for the downtrodden masses who needed something or anything to believe in. His speeches were rallying cry for those who felt abandoned. He had promised greatness, a return to the glory days when Helios was the envy of the galaxy. He raised his arms to the crowd, and they roared with approval. His campaign had been one of sweeping promises and bold visions. Cyrus had painted a picture of a future where Helios would rise from the ashes, where they would reclaim their place as a galactic power, thriving and prosperous once more. His voice, strong and commanding, boomed through the streets of Nervous City, the capital of Helios Prime. Helios is not dead, he shouted. We are not a relic of the past, we're the future. And I will lead us back to greatness. The crowd erupted in cheers, their faith renewed by his words. Cyrus had them in the palm of his hand, and he knew it. He was their chosen leader, the man who would deliver them from the brink of collapse. They had placed their trust in him, and Cyrus was determined not to let them down, at least not in the way they expected. The election had been won in a landslide. His rival, Senator Elysian, had been a voice of reason and caution, advocating for diplomacy and cooperation with other star systems. But reason had no place in Helios anymore. The people wanted action, and Cyrus had given them that. They wanted victory, dominance, and a return to power. They wanted what was rightfully theirs, and Cyrus had promised to deliver. Within days of his victory, Cyrus made his move. His first act as leader was to launch a preemptive strike on the neighboring Aurora system, a system rich in resources but politically divided. Aurora had been a target for years, its wealth of raw materials tempting to the dying Helios system. Cyrus had wasted no time. He ordered the fleet to mobilize, and within hours, Helios military forces surged across the stars, striking at Aurora's defenses with a ruthless efficiency that shocked the galaxy. The war had begun. For a time, it seemed like Cyrus had been right. Helios forces crushed the unprepared Aurorans, seizing control of their resource-rich planets in a matter of weeks. The victory was swift, and the people of Helios celebrated as though they had won a war for the ages. Cyrus was hailed as a hero, the man who had brought them back from the brink. The media glorified him, portraying him as the savior of Helios, the man who would lead them into a new era of prosperity. But beneath the surface, all was not well. General Laurenes, a respected military leader who had initially supported Cyrus, watched the events unfold with growing unease. She had been one of his most trusted advisors during the election, but now she saw a side of Cyrus that troubled her deeply. His thirst for power, his obsession with conquest. It was not the man she had thought she was following. Laurenes, a sharp-witted and battle-hardened veteran, stood in her office, staring at the holographic display of the Aurora system. The glowing map showed Helios' military dominance, but it also revealed something more ominous. Cyrus' ambitions weren't just about Aurora. He had his sights set on far more. This isn't about securing resources, she muttered to herself. He wants to dominate the entire sector. Laurenes knew that continuing on this path would only lead to ruin. Helios had overextended itself. The people might have cheered for victory now, but the reality was that their economy was still in shambles, their infrastructure crumbling. The resources they had seized from Aurora would only last so long. And worse, the neighboring systems were beginning to take notice. The galaxy wouldn't stand by and let Helios conquer freely. As the weeks passed, Zyro's appetite for war grew. He ordered further strikes on nearby systems, raiding and pillaging planets that had little means of defending themselves. His message to the galaxy was clear: Helios would stop at nothing to regain its former glory, even if it meant burning everything in its path. Meanwhile, the Galactic Alliance, a coalition of systems that had previously been more concerned with their own internal struggles, began to organize. They couldn't ignore the threat of Helios any longer. Aurore's fall had been a wake-up call. If they didn't act soon, Helios would come for them next. The alliance formed quickly, led by systems like Icarus and Vega Prime, both of which had strong military forces and strategic importance in the galaxy. They pooled their resources, uniting under a common cause, to stop Zyros before his war consumed them all. Back in Helios, the cracks were starting to show. Zyros had promised prosperity, but for the common people, life had only gotten worse. Resources were being funneled into the war effort, leaving civilian infrastructure to rot. Food shortages became rampant, and taxes skyrocketed to fund the military campaigns. The people who had once cheered for Zyros were now growing restless, but any dissent was swiftly silenced by his regime. Zyros had surrounded himself with loyalists, military leaders and politicians who had benefited from his rise to power. But General Lorenice could no longer stand by and watch the system destroy itself. She had tried to warn Zyros that this path of war would lead to ruin, but he had dismissed her concerns, accusing her of being weak and afraid of greatness. Now, Lorenice realized she had no choice but to act. She gathered a small group of trusted allies, military officers who shared her doubts about Zyro's leadership. In secret, they began to form a plan. It wasn't rebellion, at least not yet, but they needed to find a way to stop Zyros before he led Helios to destruction. Their opportunity came sooner than expected. One day, a team of scientists from Helios Ministry of Energy made a chilling discovery. The core of Helios Prime, the system's capital planet, was becoming unstable. Years of reckless resource extraction, combined with the planet's natural aging process, had accelerated the deterioration of its core. If nothing was done, the planet would collapse, taking millions of lives with it. Lorenice received the report first, and the implications hit her like a shockwave. Helios Prime wasn't just the capital, it was the heart of the system. If it fell, the entire star system would be plunged into chaos. But when she presented the findings to Zyros, his reaction stunned her. "I know," Zyros said, leaning back in his chair, his face devoid of concern. "I've known for a while." "You knew?" Lorenice's voice trembled with anger. "You knew the planet was going to collapse, and you still pursued this war?" Zyros smirked. "Of course, Helios is dying, General. I'm simply ensuring that we go out with a bang." Lorenice stared at him in disbelief. "You a broken bar, you're sacrificing us all." "No," Zyros replied calmly. "I'm ensuring that Helios is remembered. Even if we fall, our name will echo through the stars for eternity. The galaxy will remember our strength, our will to survive. That's what matters." Lorenice felt her stomach churn. Zyros wasn't trying to save Helios, he was trying to immortalize himself. This war wasn't about revival, it was about making sure that he was remembered as the leader who defied the galaxy. "You're mad," she whispered, stepping back. Zyros stood, towering over her. "Mad? No, General. I'm a realist. And soon, the galaxy will see that." Lorenice left the room in a daze. The weight of what she had just heard pressed down on her like a physical force. Zyros had known all along. He had known that Helios was on the verge of collapse, and instead of doing something to stop it, he had driven the system toward an even faster demise. He wanted to be remembered as a conqueror, a man who had defied the galaxy even if it meant leading his people to total annihilation. She had to stop him. That night, Lorenice gathered her most trusted officers. They met in secret, far from the prying eyes of Zyro's loyalists. The group was small, but each member was fiercely loyal to Lorraines and shared her growing concerns about Zyro's increasingly erratic behavior. She laid out the situation in stark terms. Helios Prime was dying, and if they didn't act, Zyros would take the entire system down with him. "We need to ally with the Galactic Alliance," she said. "It's the only way." Her words were met with stunned silence. It was one thing to doubt Zyros privately, but to suggest collaboration with their enemies was treason. Yet the gravity of the situation was clear to them all. Lorraine's plan wasn't rebellion, it was survival. One by one, the officers nodded their agreement. They had no choice but to act. The next few days were a blur of covert operations. Lorraines and her team worked in secret, using encrypted channels to contact the leaders of the Galactic Alliance. It wasn't easy. The Alliance had every reason to distrust anyone from Helios, given the brutal campaigns they had endured at the hands of Zyro's forces. But Lorraines was persistent. She sent intelligence reports, troop movements, and classified data that would give the Alliance a strategic advantage. Finally, the response came. The leaders of the Alliance were willing to meet, but on their terms. The meeting would take place on Icarus, one of the core planets of the Alliance, and Lorraines would have to come alone. It was a risk, but Lorraines knew it was the only way. She departed Helios in a small, unmarked ship, accompanied only by her most trusted lieutenant, Kelson, a seasoned officer with a sharp mind and unshakable loyalty. The journey to Icarus was tense, every passing moment filled with the fear of discovery. If Zyros found out what she was doing, it would mean immediate execution for her and everyone who had supported her. But there was no turning back now. When they arrived at Icarus, they were greeted by a delegation of Alliance leaders. Commander Oren, the head of the Alliance's military forces, stood at the front. He was a towering figure, known for his unyielding discipline and tactical brilliance. Beside him was Governor Thales, the political leader of Icarus, and a figurehead of the resistance against Helios. Lorraines stepped forward and presented her case. She didn't beg for forgiveness or offer apologies for the actions of Helios. Instead, she laid out the cold, hard truth. Zyros was a madman, and if he wasn't stopped, he would bring the entire system crashing down, and not just Helios, but anyone caught in the crossfire. She explained the instability of Helios Prime's core, how Zyros had known all along and had chosen war as his way of ensuring his legacy. Oren listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When Lorraines finished, he spoke. "And what guarantee do we have that this isn't a trap?" Oren's voice was low and dangerous. "For all we know, this could be a ploy to divide our forces." Lorraines didn't flinch. "You have no guarantee. But if you don't act, Zyros will come for you next. He won't stop until the galaxy burns." There was a long pause as Oren considered her words. Finally, Governor Thales stepped forward. "We'll help you," Thales said, her voice calm and steady. "But if we do, there can be no turning back. This alliance will be the end of Helios as you know it. Are you prepared for that?" Lorraines nodded. "It's already the end of Helios. I'm trying to save what's left." With that, the alliance was formed. Lorraines returned to Helios under the cover of darkness, her ship slipping through the system's defenses unnoticed. She had only a short window of time before Zyros launched his final campaign, a full-scale assault on the remaining systems of the Galactic Alliance. The final battle began 2 weeks later. Zyros, oblivious to the alliance that had been formed against him, ordered his fleets to strike at Icarus, the heart of the Alliance. His ships, massive and bristling with weapons, descended upon the system like a swarm of locusts, intent on devouring everything in their path. But the Alliance was ready. Armed with the intelligence Lorraines had provided, they had fortified their defenses and mobilized their fleets. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had seen in centuries. Starships clashed in the void, their lasers lighting up the darkness like 1,000 suns. Explosions rippled across the battlefield as ships were torn apart by the relentless barrage of fire. On the ground, troops engaged in brutal hand-to-hand combat, fighting for every inch of territory. Lorenice, commanding a contingent of Helios forces that had defected to the Alliance, led the charge. She had no illusions about the cost of this battle. They were fighting for the survival of not just the Alliance, but for the people of Helios who had been deceived by Zyros' lies. As the battle raged, Zyros watched from his command center on Helios Prime. He had expected victory, confident that his forces would crush the Alliance as they had done with so many others. But as reports of heavy losses flooded in, his confidence began to falter. "Impossible," he muttered, pacing the length of the command room. "How are they doing this?" The answer came when one of his officers, pale and trembling, reported that General Lorenice had defected to the Alliance. She had been feeding them intelligence, giving them the upper hand. Zyros' rage was volcanic. "Lorenice!" he roared, smashing his fist into the console. "She will pay for this betrayal." But his fury couldn't change the tide of the battle. One by one, his ships were destroyed, and his forces were pushed back. The Galactic Alliance, united and relentless, pressed forward, determined to end the war once and for all. In the final hours of the battle, Lorenice led a daring assault on Helios Prime itself. She knew that if they could take the capital, Zyros' regime would crumble. The Alliance forces descended on the planet, fighting their way through the streets of Nervous City, which had once been a beacon of hope but now lay in ruins. Lorenice and her team pushed through to the command center, where Zyros had barricaded himself. When she finally confronted him, he was a shadow of the man who had once inspired millions. His once imposing figure was hunched over, his eyes wild with desperation. "You!" he spat as Lorenice entered the room. "You betrayed me. You betrayed Helios." "I betrayed nothing," Lorenice said coldly. "You betrayed us all." Zyros, refusing to admit defeat, activated the doomsday device he had been preparing, a weapon designed to collapse the unstable core of Helios Prime, taking the entire planet with it. The ground shook violently as the countdown began. Lorenice and her team sprang into action, racing to disarm the device. It was a race against time, with Zyros watching from the sidelines, a twisted smile on his face. He wanted to see it all burn. He wanted to leave a legacy of destruction that would be remembered for eons. But Lorenice was faster. With only seconds to spare, she deactivated the device, stopping the chain reaction that would have obliterated the planet. Zyros, realizing that his final gambit had failed, let out a primal scream of rage. He lunged at Lorenice, but she stepped aside, and he fell to the ground, defeated and broken. It was over. With Zyros' death, the war came to an end. The Galactic Alliance declared victory, and the remnants of Helios forces surrendered. Lorenice stood on the balcony of the command center, looking out over the devastated city. The people of Helios had been given false hope, and now they were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered world. The Galactic Alliance moved swiftly to help the survivors, offering aid and resources to rebuild. But Helios would never be the same. Its people would never forget the man who had led them to the brink of destruction, nor the general who had saved them from complete annihilation. Lorenice, now a hero to both Helios and the Alliance, vowed to ensure that the mistakes of the past were never repeated. She would help rebuild, not just Helios, but the galaxy itself, fostering unity instead of division. As the stars shone brightly in the sky above, Lorenice knew that the real work had only just begun.